Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. Hello everyone. Before I get started with the next few questions, I want to notify you of two recent appearances of mine that you may have missed. I talked about one of them on the Stefan Molyneux video that went out, but that YouTube didn't give my subscribers notifications of, so maybe you missed that. In any case, I spoke with Rucka for 6.5 hours, commenting on that first Stefan Molyneux clip of the recent ones I've done. I did one or maybe more a while back, but that first one where Stefan is criticizing Ayn Rand's ethics. We talked about that and other things for 6.5 hours. You can go to Rucka's Reacts channel to find that. And I also spoke with Eli Walls. You can just search for him on YouTube, Eli Walls, Walls. I will link both of those below if I remember. I usually don't. I'm trying to get better about that. And we spoke for about 3 hours on various issues. It transformed into a movie discussion, mostly. Maybe half or more of the time was spent talking about movies. I thought it was really fun, so if you're interested in my thoughts on various movie topics, you can listen to that. And also about how I think the world is doomed. So anyway, those are two recent things I've done that are not on my channel. Oh yeah, I should add those to my playlist. I forget to do that too. Well, usually I remember, but I just reminded myself to do that. Okay, into today's questions. If women can choose to have an abortion, should a man be able to choose to not be involved if the woman wants to have it? Yes. A man is not bound to support a child he does not want. Now, if he agrees that he wants the child, and the woman does too, and then it's born, he can't change his mind afterward and say, I don't want any responsibility for this anymore, you can't keep me on the hook for this. Yes, you made the decision at that point, you are committed. But if the woman gets pregnant, and she does not want to have an abortion, at a time when it's still legitimate to do so, not a day before the thing is born, obviously, but definitely within the first 3 months, if she wants to keep the child, and he says, no, I don't want to have a child, and she goes ahead with it, then he should not be responsible for anything to do with that child legally. Morally, he's not responsible, and the law should reflect that. Maybe you could make a case that he has to pay for half of the cost of the abortion if he doesn't want to have the kid. I could see that, but in any case, the basic principle here is that no, a woman, if she gets pregnant, cannot just have a kid and say, well, it's your life is in my hands now. If I want this kid, it doesn't matter what you, the man, think. I mean, the man can't force her to have an abortion, of course. That would be totally wrong, but she can't force him to be responsible for the child if he doesn't want it. So if she wants it, she's free to have it, regardless of what he thinks or what he wants. But if he doesn't want to support it, she shouldn't be able to make him support it. So that's that. Next question. Is the practice of meditation in its most secular possible form a valid means of improving attention? Could it enhance man's ability to focus on introspection and better understand his emotions for rational ends? Well, the first thing here is to understand what meditation is. Meditation is not sitting down and thinking about things or sitting down and introspecting. That is not meditation. Meditation is mindlessness. It is intentional mindlessness. They call it mindfulness, but really it's mindlessness. Meditation is the act of sitting down and suppressing your rational faculty. That is the entire purpose of meditation. If you're thinking about things, you're not meditating. They call that being lost in thought. No, when you are sitting there meditating, the whole point is to focus on some perceptual level or sensory level bit of awareness and focus on that and not think about anything. And anytime a thought comes into your head, you just push it away. The whole point is to remove your ego from, well, reality, I guess. It's to get rid of your ego. It's to separate your awareness from your thoughts. You are no longer the same as your thoughts. You are no longer the same as your emotions. As soon as you have a thought or an emotion, you just push it away. That is the point of meditation. Now, I know that sounds bad based on what I just said, but I can't say whether there's no advantage to it. I don't do it myself. It's possibly a legitimate form of rest. I could see that. I mean, people go to sleep. You're shutting down your rational faculty then. So you can't say as a dogma, if you're not using your rational faculty, that's immoral. I mean, that applies within a context. Maybe meditation is okay as a form of rest. The first specific question here was, does it improve your attention? Maybe. All I can say is I don't know. Could it enhance your ability to focus on introspection and better understand your emotions for rational ends, which was the second part of the question? If it does, it is only in an indirect way because it is not training you to introspect. It is training you not to introspect. It is training you to not think. The only advantage that seems plausible to me, that I have any evidence for, let's say, is that it may help you deal with emotions. You hear people who meditate talk about this, that when you meditate, it enables you to distance yourself from your emotions. You still feel anger, for instance, but you're able to get a hold of yourself and push the anger away much more quickly in your everyday life if you've practiced meditation. And this is similar or the same thing as a common psychological tactic of getting your emotions under control. If you ever feel angry or an overwhelming emotion, the first thing to do is identify that explicitly. And it separates you from the emotion. It gives you some measure of control. It makes it clear that you are not just your emotions. You're feeling an emotion, but you have some level of control over it if you can separate yourself from it by identifying it. And meditation seems to have something to do with that. In fact, if you trust its practitioners, it greatly enhances your ability to do that. So maybe it helps with that. That's all I can say about meditation. Even in its most secular form, there are many invalid inferences made on its basis. There's obviously the religious, metaphysical implications people take from it, which is false, but even among its secular practitioners like Sam Harris, there are invalid conclusions that are drawn. Sam Harris promotes it as a way of seeing that there is no free will, for instance. So it's not a means of knowledge, it's not a means of cognition, but maybe it can help you get a handle on your emotions. Possibly. I don't know, I don't do it, as I said. Next question, can you give your opinion on social Darwinism? Yes, I can. Well, social Darwinism is mostly associated with Herbert Spencer. He was a very famous, popular philosopher in the second half of the 19th century. And his fame dropped off precipitously after that. So he's unusual in that way. Normally people as famous as he was in his own time are remembered better in history, but he is not, although his term, survival of the fittest, is definitely remembered. That is, everybody knows that term. Now, I won't talk too much about him specifically. He was an advocate of laissez-faire capitalism, which is good, although he was a collectivist. He advocated capitalism on the grounds that it helped society as a whole, which is not the proper way to defend capitalism, and ultimately will not defend capitalism and didn't defend capitalism. But in terms of social Darwinism as a whole, not just Herbert Spencer's particular ideas, social Darwinism is a collectivist view that fails to distinguish the difference between animals and human beings. Now, it is true that capitalism is Darwinian in the sense that it allows existence to promote those people whose ideas and actions are most successful by the standard of human survival. And that's exactly what happens in nature. The lion with the sharpest teeth or fastest running speed or whatever survives and passes on his genes, and in that way, his successful features are promoted and spread. Capitalism does work the same way. The difference is that competition among animals takes place across generations, whereas competition among human beings takes place within generations. The lion who doesn't have the tools to succeed will simply die. He doesn't gain anything by losing the competition. He doesn't gain anything by having the best lion win. And the way that the positive features are promoted is that the animals without those features die, so they don't get any benefit. But with human beings, this happens all within a generation. You don't have to wait for the hardware, for our biological nature to change. It's good for me to lose a competition to somebody who's better than me, say in terms of applying for a job, because that redounds to me within my own lifetime. Having the best people get jobs in principle, that benefits me. There's more wealth, better economy, more opportunities for me, all within my lifetime. So competition is transfigured among beings with rational, conceptual faculties, because the whole point of the conceptual faculty is that it allows us to improve within our own lifetime. Before reason, you had to wait for the slow, blind process of natural selection to improve an organism's ability to act for its own survival, or a species' ability to act for its own survival, because the organism itself will just die. But to wait for organisms to develop that could better act for their own survival. But with the advent of concepts of reason, we can now do that within a single lifetime. We can take control manually. We don't have to wait for nature to adapt us to the environment. We can now take the environment and rearrange it for us. So social Darwinism is essentially wrong. It is collectivist, which it has to be, because its view is that view I just described. It fails to distinguish what's different about human beings. So in its view, yeah, look, animals have to die for the betterment of the species, which is true. Now that's not true for us as rational beings, but social Darwinists fail to make that distinction, and so they are collectivists, and they say, yeah, well, people have to die for the benefit of the group, for the benefit of society, we have to let the weak die. But that's not actually how it works among rational beings, because it's not death, it's, oh, I don't get this job. But all the benefits of living in a society where the best win actually come back to help me, because I don't have to die for those benefits to come about. So that's what's wrong with social Darwinism. That's its nature, that's what's wrong with it. But, as I say, there is an element of truth to the idea that capitalism is naturally selective. Capitalism is all about letting existence be the standard and therefore promote the propagation of the fittest. But again, on the human level, that is to everyone's benefit, even the weak, whereas on the animal level, an animal has to die. It can't ever see those advantages. But yes, capitalism does work by allowing somebody who has a good, productive idea to make money. And now he has more economic power, and he holds more sway in the economy. So by that process of natural selection, the people with the best ideas have the most economic power and sway in the economy. So you have this natural development of people with the best ideas influencing the economy to a greater and greater degree. And that's exactly how it should be, because that's what promotes human survival and happiness. Next question. What do you think of Platonic love? The idea that romantic love is less rational and therefore inferior to non-sexual love. Well, obviously, I think that is wrong. Emotions and reason are not at odds. They are not opposites. Now, Platonic love today, people use it to mean non-sexual love, as this questioner said. It's I love my brother, I love my parents, I love my friend in a non-sexual way. And the idea is, well, that's more rational. That's better because it's less emotional. So emotions are against reason, so the more emotional, the less pure the love is. Now that is, of course, purely Platonic. That is why they call it Platonic love. Because it's involved with the emotions and the body and sex, and real love is this pure, rational, immaterial thing. Obviously, that's wrong. Romantic love is the highest form of love because it is the most rational, and that is why it is the most intensely emotional. You can't be in love without using reason. Now, a lot of people claim they're in love, and they're not, and sex is not possible only to people who are in love. I mean, just look at the James Taggart sex scene in Atlas Shrugged. That is something like Platonic love, although that's probably even uglier than Platonic love. I won't insult Plato with that. But if you truly love someone, then that is the result of using reason. Identifying characteristics about this other person, knowing your own values, seeing how this other person matches those values, knowing why your values are good. The clearer you see reality, the more intense your emotions are. I mean, people know this to a degree, they just don't put it together. Why do people drink? Why do people evade? Why do people do all manner of things to make their minds hazy? Because if you don't see things clearly, if you don't reason clearly, if you don't accurately identify reality, you can dull your emotions. So people understand this with alcohol. Now, alcohol can also make you emotional, but you can drink if you're angry to blur your vision, see less clearly why you're angry, and then that emotion will be attenuated. Reason does not diminish your ability to feel emotions. The clearer you see something, the more emotional it is. The clearer you see what's at stake in a conflict, the more intensely you feel about it. You know this from watching movies or reading novels. If it's vague and you don't really know what's at stake, you don't feel as much. But if you know what's on the line, you see it clearly, then your emotions are heightened. So reason is just our means of identifying reality. And the clearer you identify reality, the stronger you can feel about it. So no, I think Platonic love in the literal sense of love in a Platonic way, that's not possible. There's no such thing as Platonic love. So what people are referring to, if they mean it in a more serious philosophical way than just non-sexual love, is this Christian idea of loving everyone in an egalitarian way. This goes back to the meditation question. Sam Harris talks about this all the time. Meditation allows you to love everybody. Just feel goodwill for everyone, your enemies, for everyone. That is not love, whatever that is. That is not the same thing as selfish passion. And it is inferior, both in terms of just the irreducible feeling of it and in terms of its practicality, because it is not very practical to love your enemy. And so if you do, you won't feel that emotion for long because he will slit your throat while you are busy loving him. What about patents that have been invented by corporations? How do you time limit those patents? Why do you need time limits in the first place? You don't have time limits for private property, so why on intellectual property? Okay, well, let's take these in order. What about patents invented by corporations? What about them? Corporations are just people. Whatever the standards are for how long you should have a patent simply applies to the people who compose that corporation. A corporation, just like any group, is not a mystical or supernatural, rather, entity that transcends the people who make it up. It's just a collection of people. So you would simply apply the standards for time limits on patents to the people who originally owned it, who make up the corporation. Simple as that. How do you time limit those patents? Well, as I've explained before, property is about protecting the relationship between reason and survival. If you invent something, you deserve the rewards of having invented it. You deserve those rewards, not your descendants who have nothing to do with you. So that is why patents are time limited. There are other reasons too, which I'll get into in a second with the rest of this question, but that's why you time limit them. Now, that does not mean that you can't bequeath your intellectual property to your immediate children, because you can have a legitimate interest in the well-being of your children. So it's not, as soon as you die, it just becomes public domain. No, it's totally legitimate for you to care about what happens to your children, and so you want what you created to benefit your children, which indirectly benefits you. So I think a policy of life of the inventor plus another lifetime is the most rational, as I've explained in the past, because that covers the entire life of the person who created the value, plus another whole lifetime, which covers everyone he could possibly have a personal interest in. So I think that's the most rational policy. Now you could say, well, once he's dead, why does it matter? He's not alive to enjoy it. Yes, but other people are still alive, and that whole system would collapse. I mean, it's like wills. Well, what, the person's dead. Who cares anymore? You're not violating his rights. Yeah, but what about all the other people who now know that their wills won't be respected once they're dead? The whole system would collapse. So that is why you would respect the wishes of somebody who's dead. Because everybody who's alive will die. And they need to know that their wishes will be respected in order to be happy while they are alive. Next part of this question, why do you need time limits in the first place? Well, because if you don't have them, then you have this static source of income for all time. So 20 generations later, should people just be making income off of something their however many times grandfather invented? No, that's ridiculous. People shouldn't have to pay you for that because you didn't come up with it, and your having it has no relevance to the well-being of the person who did come up with it. Now this last part. You don't have time limits for private property, so why on intellectual property? I assume by private he means physical. Well, there are a couple things here. First, you do have time limits on physical property. First, you have the inherent time limit of nature. Things disintegrate. Physical things fall apart. You can say, well, there's no law that if your father built a table and he passed it down to you, you can only have that for the duration of your father's life plus another lifetime. No, that table can stay for generations. So why the difference? Well, because that table has a natural time limit. It will disintegrate on its own. It won't stay together forever. And if you want it to stay together, you actually have to do work on it. Unlike intellectual property, there's no upkeep involved. And there's no deadline because it's an abstract pattern. It won't ever disintegrate. Second, for pieces of physical property that do transcend any reasonable time limit, that are for practical purposes eternal, not actually, but again for practical purposes, such as land, there are time limits on land. You own something because you're making productive use of it. If you own a piece of land and you just let it sit there for 10 years and you don't do anything with it, then in a rational free society, it would revert back to unowned property. And anybody who is willing to make productive use of it could take it and do so, and it would become his property and not yours. You do not own it in perpetuity outside of all context. Lastly, there is a difference between intellectual and physical property. If you own a table, as I said, it's physical, it will disintegrate, you have to maintain it if you don't want it to, but also you cannot simply duplicate it and make money off of it in an unending way, as you can with intellectual property. You can just sell the pattern an unlimited number of times. You can just sell the novel, for instance, over and over and over again. You can only sell the table once, which is why physical property is not a problem. It doesn't become a static source of unending income. And it doesn't block people from making use of something that doesn't need an owner. Nobody needs to own the abstract pattern of a novel after a certain point. That can just be anybody can take it and use it, because it's not a single physical entity. It's an abstract pattern. But for a table, someone has to own it. There's only one. It has to be in somebody's possession. So there's no basis for letting it enter the commons. What does that even mean? It's not something you can multiply. It's a single physical thing. So there's no basis for having it enter the commons in the same way there is a basis for having an abstract intellectual production enter the commons after a given period of time. The intellectual property can just exist out there. It doesn't need one person holding on to it, but a table does need one person holding on to it. So how are you going to decide other than by just the chain of transactions that's taken place? If it stays in a family for generations, you say, well, you don't have the right to that. Even assuming there's no upkeep required. You don't have a right to that because it's past the life of the creator plus another lifetime. So why do you have a right to that? Well, what's the alternative? It's not like intellectual property. You can't just spread it around. You can't give it to anybody. It's not duplicable. Somebody has to have it. So it may as well be the person who's inherited it. I mean, you can say they don't deserve it, but neither do you. So somebody has to own it. I think that will do it for today. If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.